r/ask Reddit, ex-racists of Reddit. What made you change your mind? My whole family is quite racist. When I was little I was trying to wrap my head around the rules of the world. So I thought it was as simple as different teams. Blacks versus whites was just like the Red Sox versus the Tigers. Then my grandmother starts going on about how horrible Polish people are and how I'm never to talk to them. So I'm psyched. Screw those Polish people. Whatever color they are, we're mortal enemies. Then she points out our Polish neighbor to me. But she's white. I point out to my grandmother that she's white so we're on the same team. My grandmother says no, that she's a mixed breed. I point out that my great granddad was a Shoshone Indian and that I'm a mixed breed. She says that doesn't count. That's when I realized she was just making up the rules and I wasn't going to play games with someone who couldn't stick to the rules. Just curious. But why did your grandma hate Poles? 200 years ago, someone stole a pig. That person was Polish. Mortal enemies ever since. Yes, I'm serious. My grandma never forgave her sister for marrying a Pole. LOL. Was raised in a racist and close community. When I joined the army and met different people, I grew up and moved out of my parents' house. My uncle used to be the most racist person I knew and it drove me crazy. But he is an old white man and set in my ways, is what he would say when confronted. It all changed the day his great-granddaughter was born. His granddaughter had married a black man and he was unaccepting until that baby was born. She had him wrapped around her pinky finger from her first breath. Since then there are several mixed children in the family. It's awesome to see the difference in his behavior. He genuinely loves them all and accepts the racially different spouses of his grandchildren and their children. If he hears anyone being racist he shuts it down. Oh man. I worked at a doctor's office a few years ago. We had a patient come in, white lady carrying a newborn black baby. I mean he was like 2 days old. We chatted a little bit, and she told me she had been on a waiting list to adopt a baby for years. She had gotten a call the night before, saying a woman in Detroit had just given birth and she wants to give up the baby. They asked if she wanted him and explained he was black. She was so excited. She got to the hospital right away, but she told me she had called her parents on the drive over to inform them of the good news. They were elated at first, until they realized their grandchild was going to be black. She told me her parents said that she either chooses them or the baby, because they won't be related to her ender. She said bye. Hung up the phone with no regrets. She was so in love with that baby. He was a cute little guy. College roommate was Muslim. Definitely was not a terrorist. Kinda already knew my paps was wrong about that, but when you live with someone for an entire year it takes you from kinda already knew to holy shit that way of thinking is ducked up. I got into D&D in college. Kinda surprised my dad when I told him Ahmed was my dungeon master. No, it's not like that. We roleplay. We take turns rolling to initiate. We ACT out what we're doing sometimes with others in a group. And we can stay up all night. Why are you so red? I never made the choice really to be racist, but I grew up in South Mississippi and my family wasn't overtly racist, but they were the kind to say racist things behind closed doors and didn't allow us to watch TV shows such as The Cosby Show or Fresh Prince, and definitely no rap music in the house. I absolutely fell in love with a lot of black artists in the early 90s. I loved the hip hop scene at the time and holy shit, Fresh Prince was the best sitcom on television. I played football with 80% black guys and worked at Popeye's Chicken with over half the staff being black. I guess you can say my own real world exposure despite their attempt to shelter me changed me. I cringe at some of the vernacular I used in my early youth, as the N-word was the same as black in my house. I literally was not raised to know that was a bad word. I'm glad that from the age of maybe 12 on I learned to love all people on my own. A guy I worked with said he was neo-Nazi as a teenager and ended up in prison somehow. He hated Jews for some reason, and blacks. He was never clear on why, just that he had so much hatred in his heart, and that was his outlet. He was in prison for many years. I think he almost killed somebody by beating them up. So, many years later and in prison there was a mentor type staff there, and this one lady was so helpful to him. And she cared about him so much that it really started to get into his head the idea of being a positive person. Then, he learned that she was Jewish, and he said he couldn't believe she was so kind and caring despite the fact he was acclaimed neo-Nazi. From that day he swore to be a better person. He learned his lesson. He's a pretty great guy these days, doing his family thing and making sure his son grows up with lots of love and all that he didn't have. Really remarkable. Great guy. It seems that what you are taught as a child is sometimes so hard to overcome. From my experience within the criminal justice system, you lose people by about age 5. You have maybe a few years between 5 and 8 to make a difference. But the good lessons just don't stick when there's so much strife in their lives. Most of the kids need to literally be pulled out of their homes and put somewhere stable with empathetic people because they have none in their lives to stand a chance at a normal life. And by normal, I mean a life without PTSD, BPD, and with some baseline emotional intelligence and the ability to form healthy relationships. It's jarring seeing a kid and knowing they're basically a walking corpse and not being able to reach in and change the trajectory of their life, even though they're right there in front of you. The first few times, anyway. My grandma grew up in Virginia in the 1900s. Being racist is just the default setting. Nana loved her family more than anything, though, so at one point in the late 1980s, she met her first not 100% white grandkid and discovered she still loved him. She made astounding late life progress accepting that darker skin toned people were not only people, but family, friends and welcome in her house. Reminds me of what a comedian said, "Yay, I grew up in a very racist part of Virginia called Virginia." I wasn't actively racist when young, but my surroundings did affect me. I never once considered myself racist until I started noticing that at times, I would look at a black person and think they're lucky for living in my country, Caucasian majority. This made me start to question myself. Why was I having those thoughts? I guess I had just been subliminally raised that way. You see someone dirty you think ugh. Take a shower. You see someone black you think ugh. Go back to where you came from. Only after realizing this did I start to actively try to rewire my brain, so to say. Glad those times are way beyond me now. I've always felt that this kind of subtle, unconscious racism is more powerful than the overt kind. It's smaller in each individual but far more widespread. It's hard to notice even in yourself without taking the time for some introspection. Not everyone does that. My mom was like this. She was a sweet, kind woman, and I never saw her treat anyone different because of skin color. But she grew up in a time of segregated water fountains and it showed. I had a hell of a time explaining why saying I met the nicest colored lady at the store today wasn't acceptable anymore. Not myself, but men a former racist, or at least, now less racist, friends of mine were able to have their minds changed just by simple exposure, especially to non-whites that didn't fit the stereotype. At first, it starts that they are just one of the good ones, but after a while when they meet enough good ones, they start to realize that the good outnumber the bad and their racial worldview starts to crack. Doesn't work on them all, though. Some are racists due to education and esteem issues, but many are racist simply from lack of exposure to other races, only having what the media environment they live in tell them to fill in that gap. Absolutely, it's all about exposure. It's how Daryl Davis was able to get so many Klansmen to leave the KKK. He just persistently involved himself in their lives. He wanted to learn about their beliefs and practices. He wasn't scared away. He found common ground, mainly through music and religion. And eventually, these people got to genuinely know a black man, and all the ridiculous beliefs and ideologies suddenly stopped making sense. I think it's because once you actually know these people, race is no longer an abstraction. It becomes real. When someone says black people, you'll no longer think of a concept. You'll think of people you know who are black. They are human beings you can tell stories about. So when someone starts generalizing, you think of those people. Black people are violent, uneducated, blah blah blah. When you hear it, you may think of that black neighbor of yours from across the street who let you borrow his lawnmower that one time. He's violent and uneducated? That's not fair. Bill's a nice guy. It becomes real when someone is talking about someone you know rather than just abstractions. I wasn't an actual racist per se, but I definitely had a stereotypical idea of how a group of people is because of the action of the few or because what I have seen on the media. What made me change? Well, I saw a video of a writer named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She spoke about the dangers of the single story, and that video changed my life and it opened my eyes. Check it out on YouTube and write Chimamanda Ngozi, Dangers of a Single Story. I absolutely adore that woman. She's everything I want to be when I grow up. Being 20 feels like still being 15. Mostly confused and waiting for the real grown-ups to make decisions. Check out her book Americana. It's so good. Honestly, you'll find as you get older you'll still feel like a teenager. I'm 26 next month and I still sometimes have to remind myself I'm not 17 anymore. It's perfectly normal to feel that way, and I've met 40-year-olds who say they don't know what they want to be when they grow up. Just shows they're all winging it. Really, I've never heard of her or read her book, but I'll absolutely give it a go. I was in grade 10, a young, smart, athletic black kid attending a private school on a basketball scholarship. There were probably 5 black kids total in the high school, with around 150-200 kids in total, majority white, the rest Asian and Middle Eastern. Out of the 5 black kids in total, 3 of us were on the basketball team. The other 2 were females also on the female basketball team. Did we ever get bullied by our own classmates, teammates, and even the teachers seemed to give us a harder time? After attending for 2 years and leaving after my grade 11 year due to the stress, unfairness and imbalance of diversity, I attended a public school my last year of high school where there were over 1,000 students of every race. Having a deep hate for others who didn't look like me after those 2 years. Going to a public school where everyone just saw you as the person you are and not your outer shell gave me some enlightenment that racism is taught, not born with it in your blood. My mother told me that I would see a huge change in culture, for the better, and that kids in public school come from different classes, low, middle and upper, and I've got to see white kids who were poorer than me, and white kids who were richer than me, as opposed to the private school where everyone's dad owned a Rolls Royce. Not actually, but you get what I mean. I grew a huge appreciate for every ethnicity and every culture, and realized that it's how you're raised, and how you're brought up through your role models. People that hide behind the white picket fence are narrow-minded, and I feel truly sorry for them. Short answer: rap music and a curious mind. But what's more impressive is how thick of a shell it cracked. My stepfather, who pretty much raised me, was a Klansman, and so is his father, brothers, etc. This was an old-fashioned family too. My mother didn't speak unless spoken to. My sisters were expected to marry who my stepfather chose. This was normal to us. I was expecting to find a woman to marry and start a family as soon as I was 18. I'm 23 now, so this was recent. My stepfather beat my older sister black and blue for sleeping with a black man. He always told us that black people are rapists and gangbangers, and that Mexican while hard workers are all dirty people and will never amount to anything useful aside from cheap labor. He controlled what we watched and played to reinforce his beliefs in us. On top of this, he was a devout Christian. I was a closeted atheist since 16. But he would have literally killed me if he knew. He believed that gay people should be killed alongside of atheists and Muslims. He wasn't focused on Jews for whatever reason. I had never met a person of color until I was 17, so I never experienced anything firsthand to contradict what I was told. Sometime in my late teens I discovered rap and was obsessed. First song I heard was by Tupac and I was obsessed. Well, as I learned more, it led me to Martin Luther King Jr. and what he did for people of color. At some point I broke down crying because I realized everything I was told was a lie. When I realized I was an atheist, I decided I couldn't operate under my old mindset, so I needed something to replace it and decided to go with the speech that broke my hatred. I decided I would judge everyone based on their actions, not the color of their skin or who they prefer to sleep with. I went to a mostly black school in a very poor area and I was bullied for being white and nerdy. I hated black people with a passion. Then I graduated, went to college where black people were cool to me. I realized it wasn't black people I hated, it was that inner city culture of racism. Good case could be made that I was racist as a kid. When I was raised by and surrounded by racists for my entire childhood. Stopped pretty quick when I joined the army. Since I got out of that small shithole southern town echo chamber, experienced we were all equally shitty in Uncle Sam's eyes, watched another recruit get FTA'd for calling another recruit the N-word, witnessed a drill sergeant yank 2 recruits out and smoke the shit out of them for flashing gang signs, and just generally got the idea that racism and tribalism was incohesive and destructive. Didn't fully stop for a while longer, though. Took decades to quit hearing my dad or mom in my head when I saw a black guy go down the street, going, "Watch out for that N." Shit is pervasive about being the first thing that pop up on reflex in your head. Squash it the next. But it still was the first for a while. I grew up in a family of racists and my mind was warped to the point I would hate to see them. While I was in high school, my closest female friend forced me into a situation where I had to talk to her black friend. Sadly, I hated this at the time and was thinking about just leaving and never talking to her again. But all of a sudden we started talking about track and field, which I loved doing, and so did she. I kinda got over it over time. It was instantly, but that is how I found my future wife, and I will never be the same again. I am happy that my friend did that. Sadly, she died just before our wedding in a car accident. Education. I grew up in the deep south. 20 years of my life was spent on the same exact street that my family has lived in for over 100 years. I went to public school, K-12, so I basically grew up with the same people around aside from the occasional new student who made the questionable decision to move there. When we all graduated, we all went to the same exact community college. I just got tired of it. I made the decision to move north to go to college. One of the first courses I took was a sociology class about our country's perspectives on different races. It instantly opened my eyes to how racist I truly was. I had been raised in it, genuinely brainwashed into the ignorant thinking that rule racist attitudes. I had never even stopped to ask myself if I were a racist until that class. It was then that I came to the hard conclusion that I was racist, homophobic, and sexist. I'm female and I had some harsh attitudes toward how a female should behave, dress, etc. I'm ashamed of the things I used to think and the disdain I used to hold toward other people. But admitting to being wrong is the first step toward progression. I'm very glad that I took that class and that I realized my harmful behaviors. It's something I think back to constantly and consider it as a turning point in my life. I grew up learning that Martin Luther King was a domestic terrorist and that there was a strict racial hierarchy with NS being at the bottom. I knew in my heart it was wrong, even from a young age, but it also led to internalizing some ideas that were very wrong. I grew out of it at different points in my life. When I was in elementary school, I played basketball, but I hated losing. One day after a game I was crying because I had lost and a young black boy named Joe came up to me and consoled me. We would soon become good friends and that destroyed any immediate fear I had of black people. By the time I entered college I had many friends of different backgrounds, but I still internalized negative ideas that I didn't know were wrong. In my eyes, Black History Month or Black Lives Matter was counterproductive and didn't make sense. It would take a college education and learning how black history was systematically overwritten and destroyed, and how our criminal justice system is truly unequal even to this day, that I understood the importance. The problem nowadays is that people assume you have to be wearing a Klan robe and burning crosses on someone's lawn to be considered racist. It's okay to recognize that you can potentially have racist thoughts and ideas as long as you're reactively trying to overcome them. Whoa. You made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.